You are listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with Rob Reed and Josh Galicki, bringing together the love of nature and photography. Episode 13. We talk about the use of flash in wildlife photography with a special guest. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with me, Rob Reed, and my co-host Josh Galicki. Hi Josh, how's it going?
Hey, good Rob. Great to be with you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's been a while again, hasn't it? It's amazing how time flies in between these episodes that we record. I mean, what have you been up to?
It has, I've been shooting a lot. It's the summer heat is on, and there's a lot going on in the backyard. Got some green herons, snowy egrets, great blue herons, young osprey, which have fledged. They're diving, practicing their hunting skills. So been spending a lot of time with them and stuff in the pollinator garden, some macro work and the like. So it's been great. And I got my processing mojo back. So I've been processing images from this past spring and wintertime and just about ready to cull Shetland. I'm kind of scared. It's like
I was going to say, have you started on Shetland yet?
Not yet. I'm intimidated. I'm looking at the hard drive right here, and it's quite scary.
Yeah, how many was it? Nearly 40,000 pictures or something you came back?
45,000.
45. Crikey.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I know I came back with 20, and I wasn't shooting all the time like you.
It was crazy.
And talking about Shetland, we've got a special guest on today, we're going to be talking about the use of flash in wildlife photography. And somebody's phone's going.
Sorry about that.
I think it was me last time, wasn't it?
Probably.
It was. My phone went.
It might have been. Yeah, we might have to cut that part out.
Oh no, we'll leave it in. You see, it's we just roll with whatever happens.
Plus, it's a spam call from Xfinity. I mean, come on, I don't want their crappy cable, so they can keep it.
So where was I? Oh yes, so we're going to be talking about flash, and I'm really glad that we're joined by your partner in crime when you went to Shetland, because you went to Shetland with this chap. We're joined by Khurram Khan. Hi Khurram, how's it going?
Hey, hi Rob, hi Josh.
Hey Khurram.
Forward to culling Shetland, which is 40,000 images. Oh boy,
Yeah.
I still got to get through spring and stuff like that. But yeah, good to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
No, it's good to have you on. I mean, we've been meaning to get you on and have a chat with you, particularly about this subject, actually, because I know you in particular. I've been certainly with the competition with Wild Art Photographer of the Year. I've noticed some of your pictures coming through there, and the subtle use of flash, on some of the images, and I know one in particular. Your skunk in the backyard from a year or so ago. Was one that particularly sort of caught my attention. So I thought, you'd be the ideal person to get on and for us to have a good chat about, the use of flash in wildlife photography. Yeah, I mean, Josh and I have talked about and touched on this a couple of times, and I think that it's something that some people find quite intimidating, actually, and find difficult to understand in enough depth to be confident with its use. So I thought it would be a good sort of subject to get to grips with.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely, whatever knowledge I have about flash and its use, try to share in this talk, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, flash isn't something I use a lot of. I mean, I'm not, I know how to use it. I'm not afraid of using it. I'm not intimidated by it. But it's not something that comes into my photography a lot. I mean, how about you? I know that you've used it quite a lot in the past, mainly as sort of fill in when you're photographing birds in sort of woodland environments and forest environments.
Yeah, that's right. Mostly for fill flash, for songbirds, underneath the forest canopy. Macro, almost always I have flash when I'm shooting macro, and also for camera trapping. So I use it a decent amount, probably I'm 60% without flash, 40% with flash. And I have to say, you're absolutely right, Rob. And, flash is very much misunderstood, I think, by a lot of photographers. In addition to that, too, one of the challenges for me, it's the physicality of it. You're not just going out with a camera body and a lens. You have to go out with a lot more gear on top of your camera, or if you have off-camera flash. So it actually it weighs you down, and you need to do a lot of pre-planning before it. So that, in some ways, I need to be prepared, and it holds people back from using it. Not only is it misunderstood, people just don't want additional gear holding them back in the field. So it's a challenge. But I think in certain types of photography, macro, fill flash in dark environments, camera trapping, you absolutely need it.
Yeah, I mean, it elevates pictures and it takes them to another place, doesn't it? And actually, when you start understanding flash and how it works and how it can add value to your images, I think you can start creating things that other people don't take, because it's understanding how, that extra sort of pop of light can change things so dramatically. I mean, Khurram, what's your experience of flash? How did you start using it in the first place? And sort of explain a little bit perhaps about your journey with the use of flash.
So, as Josh said, one of the big things for me when I first got into photography, wildlife photography, was mainly we were shooting on telephotos, and it was birds, basically, because that's what we had. And when we got into songbirds, the whole concept of, you're shooting these birds in dark forests, and you're trying to get these small birds in back. I'm talking about 7-8 years ago, 10 years ago, and there was absolutely no light. So in the cameras back then, they were pretty good, but you couldn't do what we can with the ISO, and so saw a couple of people, and then basically realized that, okay, if you do flash with songbirds, you can get away with, faster shutter speeds, lower ISOs, and get that, crispiness in the plumage of the birds. And you can, using a low shutter speed and, a faster flash allows me to basically freeze the motion the way, a faster shutter speed would, without jacking up the ISO. So that's when I first started experimenting. The problem was, you had to separate the flash from your camera. So you had to put in a rig to elevate the flash. Then you had to have wires attached to your camera. Then you had to have a flash, battery pack, so you could keep pace with recharging. So you had to have another one. So the next thing you know, you're walking there with a tripod, big camera, 600 millimeter, a rig, a huge flash, a better beamer to direct your light, and a cord going. The next thing you know is like, oh my God, this is, somehow I'm losing the joy of photographing. So I kept it basically for songbirds, mainly in dark environments. And then that's how I started. Eventually, when I picked up macro, started using it in that. And then that's how it generally progressed. And as time went on, flash usage got better. The flash units are smaller. You don't have to have these big rigs attached, long wires attached. So it definitely got a lot easier. But it was mainly, the reason why I started was to photograph small songbirds in dark forest. And if you do flash, and if you shoot these birds in these colorful small wood warblers, and you really don't use flash, right, we're kind of doing a disservice, because their plumage would not pop the way it would with flash. So that's how I feel about it. It helps a lot in creating, basically that was the first thing that I realized, that, my images were sharper, crisper, had more contrast, and, everything from that nature.
I mean, you've brought in so many interesting points in that, short description of how, you started with flash and started applying it to your photography. But I mean, let's kind of take things back right to sort of basics of probably where most people listening to this will get their sort of understanding of flash. And mine was from those days of sort of 35 millimeter films, and those little Instamatic cameras, you remember, with the little bulbs on the top, where they used to go off and then they used to turn around, and then you have to put in a new. But anyway, how terrible those pictures looked with that flash, because it was the flash that was illuminating the scene rather than any ambient light at all. And it was so close to the, well, not the sensor, but the actual film plane of the the lens of the camera, that the lighting was so flat. And I think that's where most people sort of get their initial understanding of flash from, and that flash is actually there to illuminate the whole scene. Whereas what you're alluding to there and talking about is, and I think this is where flash really comes into play and really makes a big difference, is when it's an additional form of lighting, not the primary source of lighting necessarily. So what you're doing is, in essence, you are exposing to a degree for a level of the ambient light that's available, and then you're using the flash to give an extra element of light and fill in to really make that image come alive. And as you were saying, pick out those details, make the colors pop a little bit more, freeze the action when you're using a slower shutter speed, which is something we should come on and talk about, because this is a concept that perhaps some people don't necessarily understand totally, is the duration of the flash and how that can help you freeze motion rather than using shutter speed to do it, as a lot of the garden hummingbird studios setups tend to rely on. And we can come on and we can talk about that, because I think that explains the concept of flash duration and using it for exposure really, really, really well. And I think the other thing that you touched on as well was removing it's sort of separating the flash and the lens to a degree. So you have you've got this sort of, it's not a direct, you've got this sort of different direction of light, so it's not coming directly from the same sort of area as the lens, so i.e. your eye effectively. The flash is slightly off camera, if you like, by a bracket or some sort of remote trigger, which is what I prefer to use, rather than having this huge heavy bracket. As you say, I don't really want to be carrying that around everywhere. But so you make a number of interesting points there, and I think that's a really good place to start. I mean, there were so many things that I was almost writing down as you were giving that.
And there's big differences too between using flash as a main light, where you're just illuminating everything with flash, and using flash as fill light, where you're using ambient. I mean, you're just using a little bit of flash to augment the scene, like Khurram, I think you were describing with the songbirds. I mean, there's so many different methods and ways to do it. One thing I'll say, which is interesting, and hand it back over to Khurram, I don't know what it is biologically, but when we get hit with flash, you brought back memories, Rob, of opening up Transformers and He-Man when I was a kid and getting whacked with those flashes. But we all get red eye, and I guess it's a biological thing. But I've noticed with birds in particular, when you have flash close to the axis of the lens and it shoots out, they get it's steel eye. It's actually like a bluish eye that comes out. I don't know what the reason is. It's got to be some sort of biological reason, but I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Basically, it depends on light, how light falls back from the retina, which is like this. Consider the retina as
we have a doctor, Rob. We have a doctor here.
Exactly. We have a doctor in the house. Yeah. So
retina bounces the light back, and in humans, the way the lights bounce back is because of the level of the cones and the rods and their ratio. The light bounces is red, and in birds it's gray because the level is different. And which also basically they depend, the cones and the rods, what they do is some of them are, depict light in low lighting conditions and the other ones in bright light conditions, and they take and they transmit into the optic nerve, into the brain, and that's how it works. So animals that generally see at night tend to have cones more than rods, or vice versa, depending on if they're nocturnal or not. So you got to be a little bit more careful with nocturnal animals when using flash as compared to day animals, because of how their receptors are in their eyes. But the first thing I would say is, first thing is people ask, okay, when to use flash? My answer is, not to use flash, right? So I would say don't use, if you've got a beautiful sunset, as Josh has, and the back of his house, you know, you don't need a flash. You have great light, utilize that. You know, if you have a subject that's basically in light and your background's in dark, that's a great opportunity for a low-key image. You really don't need a flash, you know, if you're shooting something into the sun, unless, you know, you really don't want to do silhouette. I think those are some of the areas briefly where you shouldn't really be using flash. If you're getting nice silhouettes, you don't really need to use flash. So those are some scenarios where you really don't have to use flash, you know. But beyond that, the basic thing would be to basically illuminate the subject a little bit, make it pop, give it a fill flash, and then, you know, let the basic, you know, the basic thing should be you should expose for the background and then have the flash expose your subject, and that should make your exposure generally equal. And, you know, because if you don't expose for the background and you try to overexpose the background, then you're going to, obviously the flash is going to, you know, make your subject too bright. So those are some of the things that people should start at, you know, when not to use flash. And then, you know, when they want to use flash, obviously, as Josh mentioned, the reason to use a bracket is so that the light that goes in and the light that comes off angle, you know, so it creates a better view. It creates a little shadow at the bottom of the subject, makes it, you know, emulate natural light where people do have shadows. And because if you have shadows, that creates contrast creates depth, and your image will look better, which is why it's always preferred to shoot flash from an angle or from the height or from the right, because that's what it does. Straight on flash, it bounces from the subject back, everything's illuminated. It's one of those, like, you know, like you've seen a ghost or something. So it's like, absolutely, it doesn't create that pop.
Yeah, it completely lacks the depth, doesn't it? When it gets reflected straight back at you,
so,
you know, if you're firing it from your point of view.
Yeah, so whatever you want to do it at an angle, no matter how you want to do it, you know, and then try to create, like, you know, Josh and I have shot together where, you know, we work, okay, I'll hold the flash and then I'll hold the reflector, you work your camera, you know, and the purpose of that is to have flash from one side and use the reflector to fill the shadows on the other side, but still create a gradient. So, you know, it emulates.
Much more dramatic, right, Khurram?
Yeah, you know. Absolutely dramatic, you know. Two things, you know, always capture an eye: luminosity and contrast, right? So if you have great light, it's going to capture an attention. If you have great contrast, it's going to capture your attention. So, you know, by creating angles, you know, you can create shadows, and then that shadows basically look like natural. And that's the beauty of it, right? If you can make your flash look natural, that's the best thing.
I think that's the biggest secret, actually, with certainly in wildlife photography in particular, is when you look at a picture and you can't necessarily tell to an untrained eye that there's flash involved, then I think that's the successful image, because it's subtle, you know. But I think going back to what you were saying about, you know, using that sort of ambient light, I think a good trick for somebody who's just sort of getting into using flash in their photography and is struggling a little bit with understanding how it all sort of, the pieces of the pie come together. I think what I would do is take I don't know, just you know, I don't know, a soft toy or something like that, and put it in a reasonably well lit situation. Photograph it with a bit of natural light, you know, an overcast day or a shaded room or something like that is probably an ideal place. Expose for it, you know, as you see it, as the scene is in front of you. Then add a bit of flash directly from the camera, see how that affects the image, and then start moving the flash away from you, start playing around with different power values, and see how that then starts affecting your image. Point. And when you start to understand how it then comes together with something, with a completely controlled environment that you have in front of you, you can then start putting those experiences to work in the field when you're looking at you know, subjects that are moving around. You don't have as much time, but a subject that, you know, like your woodland birds, for example, that need a pop of fill flash. Well, fine. Well, a flash on a bracket on a camera So it's slightly off angle is fine for that. We're exposing for, the ambient light. We might stop it down a stop or two, maybe, and we'll let the flash do the rest. So you've got that ambient light, and then the flash is just coming in and just, as you say, giving it that pop of contrast and color that it needs. But you're not necessarily going to be looking directly at that image and going, oh, that's flashed. And if you want to see the difference, then turn the exposure right down, so you basically get a black photo without the flash, and then let the flash do all the work, and you will see the difference immediately.
Yeah, and look to try to break the rules too. I mean, I've done this, Khurram, we've been out in the field too, where instead of exposing for the ambient, we'll underexpose a little bit and let the fill flash work a little harder. So you tread that fine line of making the image look a bit flashed, but what you get, the surroundings around the bird are much darker, a low key effect, if you will, and that bird pops out more. So you get more drama with that. So Rob, I think what you just said, and Peter Bambusek, I think, mentioned this to us in a conversation a while back before he goes into, the jungles in Central America or Borneo. He plays around with, I think his kids' toys. He was telling us exactly that in different scenarios. So going into the field, he gets to experiment at home, and then he's got certain ideas and things that he can bring into the field, because obviously if you're shooting a warbler or some sort of fast moving bird, you don't have time to play around with that stuff. So it's better to have that knowledge going into the field. I mean, you certainly could do it the other way, but it would just take a lot longer.
Be prepared, I think, is the key here, isn't it? Yeah.
Elaborating on what both of you guys said. So Peter, obviously, he does flash very, very well. Another guy who does this very well is Greg. I think he lives in Costa Rica, Greg Basco.
Yeah.
So he does flash very well. And what I did was, my son has a Batman figure that I've used to, practice with flash. And I want to go back to a little bit of basics if we have a little time. So, when you're doing, generally speaking, you're using a subject at home. And what Rob was talking about was, same speed and play with the powers. He's talking about manual flash. Right. And you can have full power, which is 1:1. And then, you increase it 1:2, 1:4, 1:8, 1:16, and so on, 32 and 64 and 128. That's generally most flashes go. And as you go, the flash gets faster, the duration gets shorter, and the light gets weaker. But those are all manual flash. So, whatever light you get and it comes back, a lot of that will depend on the flash, the shutter speed of the camera. Most people want to use what is called TTL flash. And TTL flash is important because TTL flash takes into account if a subject is moving. So if somebody's using manual flash at 1/4 the power, right, 1/4, then at a certain distance, flash, people have to remember, flash is a linear relationship, so it's a square root. So if you increase the distance, it's not like you have to go from 1/4 to 1/2. You may have to increase the power even more. So as the subject is moving on a manual flash, you have to control the power. The advantage of using TTL is that as the subject moves, the camera takes into account the distance because through the lens. So it fires a little beam, the beam goes, hits your subject, comes back into the camera meters for it, and then it dials in the flash power, and you can control it with exposure compensation. But that's how TTL generally works. And if the distance is further, the light it takes for the flash to come back is longer. So the exposure is done that way. So the camera will try to raise the power of the flash. One of the things that I learned that people didn't know is like, okay, you use TTL flash, but what kind of metering going on? So as of, is it spot metering? So is it matrix metering? Matrix by I mean the whole scene. Different cameras call it differently. So flashes don't do spot metering. So if you are using TTL flash, most camera, whether be it Canon, Sony, or everything, as far as I'm concerned, and I've done some research about it, will use matrix metering. Using matrix metering, the problem with matrix metering, you have to remember, they're going to try to expose and make everything gray. So your flash exposure in TTL is going to try to make everything gray. So if you have a bright subject, it's going to try to make it darker. If you have a darker subject, it's going to try to make it brighter, just like any other exposure. So when using TTL flash, which is generally what's recommended for subjects that are moving, such as songbirds, because they're here in one branch and then they're on the other branch and then they're over there, TTL is recommended, and you exposure compensate. But remember, you're going to be doing matrix metering. So that's something I thought.
Khurram, let me ask you this, to your point. Is it fair to say, and I've always used kind of this model, if I'm shooting a subject that is not moving and I can determine the distance between myself and the subject, there's variability, I'll use flash as a main light I'll use manual flash. If I can't control the distance to the subject, I'll use TTL. Is that the general principles that you use based on what you're saying?
Right. You can use manual, but if the subject moves away, obviously it's going to be a little darker. If it comes closer, it's going to be a little brighter. So you can do that, but generally for subjects like that aren't moving, you want to use like a macro subject that you and I photograph, right?
Frog, turtle sitting there, you come across it, yeah.
So manual is absolutely fine. The turtles we photographed, what was it? The Eastern painted. In the summer, in the spring, we use manual because, let's be honest, that turtle wasn't going anywhere.
Not very quickly, anyway.
That guy was chilled and sleeping away.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to use TTL, and then generally, we can talk about some rough basic settings to start with. Less is more. A lot of cameras are ISO invariant, so try to keep flash on the negative side. You can recover shadows in today's age, but if you blow up something, it ain't coming back.
Yeah. What I would say about flash as well, and the thing I've noticed when I've used it, is when you are using the higher ISO settings and, say you're, going back to our woodland birds again, and you're at, I don't know, 6,400 or 12,800 or whatever, at a level that you would expect some noise to start coming into the darker areas of the image. When you start introducing that little pop of flash, it's amazing how that improves
absolutely
the noise, the noise situation at those higher ISOs. And if people actually want to check this out for themselves, that's where I would start. I would, as you were saying, I would start with just a small pop of weak flash in those situations and just see how that improves the image, literally from a grain and noise point of view.
Exactly. What I'll normally do is if I look at a scene as I'm walking in and the light is even, I'll go for, generally I'll set up my eyes, whatever I want to do. I would probably shoot speed sing, so you really don't want to worry about that. And then you can start your flash with TTL with a -2 exposure comp, and then go from there. If you see the lights moving, then I'll generally throw my ISO to auto ISO, do a -2, and then control my shutter and control my aperture, and then go from there. And then generally what people can experiment, and this, even if they like in Nikons, you can do that. You can seal. I'll say, okay, my ceiling is 1600 ISO, and when you take the exposure and you do it with a flash, the ISO will drop. Once the TTL kicks in, and your image is cleaner. And even for the same ISO, such as 3200, with and without flash, the image is just cleaner.
As we're talking about this too, one thought came to my mind. When we expose for ambient light, it's mostly by a set of rules, in the sense, if we have bright whites, maybe we're down one stop. Or, if it's a cloudy day, we want to go high key, maybe we're +2. But I think when it comes to flash, there's more variability. Flash to me is more to taste. And I think when you were talking, Khurram, experiment, maybe start -2 with fill flash and move around from there. I find the difference between using flash and just using ambient light is flash is more to taste, because you can use flash and not burn your highlights, but it could still look crappy, or maybe it looks good. A lot of it seems to be, or from my perspective, it's more to taste than when you're exposing for ambient light per se. Just my thought.
Yeah, and the other thing to talk about as well is shutter speeds, and how that actually doesn't really play a huge part in flash exposure when we're talking about exposure values. We're just basically talking about aperture settings and ISO, because the flash duration is so fast compared to the shutter speed that we've got.
If you're using just flash to illuminate, the cameras have sync speeds. And, interesting enough, the sync speeds on some of my older DSLRs it was 1/250th of a second. For the R5, and I think even the R3, I think it's 1/200th of a second. I don't know why. This is Canon, but you want to keep your shutter speed below that sync speed if you're using flash primarily to illuminate, or flash as a main light, we would say. Hey, Khurram, welcome back.
Yes, very good.
Okay. we were just talking about exposure values and how shutter speed doesn't play that big a part when you're talking about using flash, because of the flash duration is so much faster than the shutter speed that you're going to be using. So when you're considering, when you're considering the overall exposure in a scene, actually you can start to use that flash to start freezing motion. And we can come on, and actually is a good point I think we should come on and talk about, because I learned this lesson fairly early on, that and you sort of hinted at it earlier in one of your the things you were saying earlier about the more powerful the flash output, the longer the duration of the light, and the shorter the duration of light. That's a really critical point if you are going to start using flash to freeze motion. And the classic example of that is those backyard studio setups for hummingbirds, that a lot of people may think it's the shutter speed that is freezing the motion of the wings, but that's not the case. It's actually the duration of the flash. So in those situations, the flash is illuminating the vast majority of that scene, but it's not just one flash, is it? We're talking about multiple flash setups. So 1 or 2 flashes on a background, 2 or 3 flashes from various directions triggered at the same time, on the bird itself. So it looks more natural. It looks like a more natural spread of sunlight, for example, but it's not. It's actually artificial light, but it's the duration of the flash itself which is freezing the motion of the bird's wings, and that has to be on a relatively low power to get that flash duration down to a level where it can freeze the motion.
Yep.
So that's something that I learned sort of fairly early on, and I came across it when I was trying to backlight birds in the garden, and when it was raining, and what I was trying to do is illuminate the raindrops, make them like stars, completely underexpose the image to get the background completely dark, which meant I had to use a much more powerful burst of light from the flash to backlight them. And using the more powerful burst of flash meant that the duration of the flash was longer. So I was getting blurred wings because I was trying to do them in flight, flying to and from feeders. And so I was getting blurry wings. And initially I couldn't quite understand what was going on, and then of course it dawned on me, well, of course, the more powerful the flash, the longer the duration, I'm going to get some blur, so I need to turn the flash down. Mm-hmm. But then the ambient light was starting to come into play, which is what I didn't want. So that to me was actually quite a good lesson in learning about the relationship between ambient light and flash duration, shutter speeds, and all the rest of it.
And personal opinion, I'll share this. This is Josh's opinion, caveat, but what you just described, Rob, I think is an aesthetically cool approach to an image. How many times have we seen these hummingbirds, the multi-flash setups, and I don't know, that's been so overcooked over the years. It's very hard to look at those images for me and say, oh, that's a nice image, just because what's behind the image. And it's really a studio shot, but I don't know. I just think boring when I see those things, but that's just
but I mean, it's understanding how it's done, isn't it? I think, and if you can explain how that's done, to people listening to this,
it's not 1/8,000th of a second.
Yeah, it's not 1/8,000. It's the flash duration at 1/20,000th of a second, or 100,000th of a second, whatever it is, whatever flash power is used. But the lower the flash power, as we were saying earlier, the faster that happens. So that's what's used. That's what's used to capture the motion.
I mean, to freeze hummingbirds, I mean, I don't think of any bird species that probably beats its wing faster than a hummingbird does. right off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So, in based on old cameras, even newer ones, there's some of the mirrorless can go up to 132,000 and stuff like that. But shooting a camera at 132,000, I can only imagine what your ISO needs to be.
Yeah. Hideous.
Hey, I don't know why I bothered. So to Rob's, it's interesting. 1/128 of a second equals to 1/40,000 of a second. So in essence, if you're putting a flash at a subject and you're dialed down to 1/28, your shutter speed is effective of 1/40th of a second. So that's how quickly the light's going to hit. 1/64th is equal to 1/32,000. 1/32 is equal to 1/20,000. 1/16 is equal to 1/10,000. So 1/16 is not that much off. It's a middle of the line kind of a flash. So if you're hitting your subject with 1/16, basically in essence that's equal to a flash shutter speed of 1/10,000, which is fairly good to freeze motion. And the advantage of that is to keep ISO down so that your image quality. I mean, people rave about ISOs and this and that, and I love it. My camera can do this ISO, my camera can do that ISO, and I'm like, that's okay. We're going to compare, Josh shoots an R3. We're going to compare an R3. It's a great camera for low light. The ISO quality of an R3 at 12,800 is not better than the ISO quality of an R3 and an ISO 100, period.
Yeah.
Right? ISO 100 on an R3 is better than ISO 12,800 on an R3. So that's where the flash comes in order to freeze motion, keep your ISO down, and have great image quality. And that's a classic. The Hummingbird is a classic setup, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. You see, the ISO is a great subject we ought to talk about for the podcast, actually, because at the end of the day, I don't think you comparing apples with apples is really difficult when you're talking about ISO, because if you're shooting something at, I don't know, ISO 12,800 or whatever, and you've got really good lighting conditions, for example, it's going to be much, much better than an image you shoot at the same ISO, but in a shaded, darker environment, because you've got more shadow to deal with. It's not just about the ISO level of you're setting on the camera. It's about the available light.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That is what affects the quality of the
There's
image.
so much to talk about. People don't even agree on how to say it. Some say ISO, I say it, and some say ISO.
ISO, yeah. I don't.
Pronunciation of it is.
You say potato, I say potato. It's fine.
The other thing about flash, speaking of that, is one is the freeze motion, and the other one is that I've seen a really good artistic use of it is to have a very slow shutter speed and have enough ambient light so that you can actually do a motion blur, and at the end of it have a high speed flash and freeze. And we've seen some great,
this is the rear curtain sync you're talking about, Khurram?
Rear curtain sync, the birds flying, and then have a streak of motion and then freeze them with a hit a flash right at the end of the exposure, creating that streak. It's a great artistic effect, if done properly.
Absolutely. I mean, if people can imagine this, say you've got, I don't know, let's take 1/20th of a second, for example, and you've got a flying bird, and you're exposing for the ambient light. Now, we all know that at 1/20th of a second, a flying bird is going to be a blurry image, and it depends on how you pan and how it works out, how that particular image works out. Most of them you'll be hitting the delete button, but every now and again you get an interesting one. But then if you add it in, and this is what I'm talking about, flash being a sort of iterative process, really. When you start with your basic image with your basic ambient light exposure, and then you start adding in the flash elements, if you add in a pop of flash right at the end of the exposure, as Khurram was saying, that sort of rear curtain sync flash setup, then you can end up with some really interesting shapes and forms formed by the ambient light and the motion that the camera is recording with that ambient light. And then you get that pop of flash at the end, as we were talking about earlier, which then freezes the motion entirely. And then you get that sort of frozen image right at the end. So you've got the combination of the two. And when I used to do a bit of commercial photography, and I used to photograph conferences, and normally at the end of these sort of business conferences, they'll have a little party. And I used to do an interesting little trick with rear curtain sync flash when people were they'd had a couple of beers afterwards, and they'd be dancing and letting their hair down, and I would expose for the ambient light, and I would let it go for half a second or something like this, so you get this sort of dreamlike blur of these sort of people dancing around the floor, and then you get this pop of flash at the end, and it would just create that sort of still image. So you get this combination of the two. So it was almost like this sort of drunken haze, if you like, coming out, in the image.
And the electric slider,
exactly,
like full bloom.
exactly. And it worked brilliantly. But this is the sort of thing that we're referring to. I mean, you can apply that in wildlife photography quite easily, and I know some people do to great effect. I mean, I can think of those diving kingfisher images, for example, where you've got that sort of streak of blur, and then you've got that frozen bird right at the end, so it looks like it's got trails of light and whatever coming. And that's how those images are done.
I've always wanted to do it with like a pileated woodpecker with its head, or like a nuthatch or something coming down the tree. With I've tried a couple times, but not successfully though. It's a cool effect. It really is.
Like like you said, if you're doing an exposure at 1/20th of a second and there's blur, and then you hit the flash at the end at 1/8 power, so the whole image is exposed at 1/20th, and right at the end where the flash hit at 1/8, that's at 1/5000 shutter speed. So it'll freeze it right at the end, and then the effect of motion, and and to your point, it's been done, but man, if it's done right, it's still one of the great artistic effects of flash. So definitely, we can use to block, stop motion with flash in different ways, fast subjects, everything frozen, or be a little bit more artistic and adventurous and have a streak of motion, and then go from there. And something that I'd like to talk about, mention is a little burst of flash, which is stroboscopic sphere, that a lot of people, that's just really short bursts in a 1 or 2 second interval, and you can dial down how many hertz you want it each to be. And that was done well. Some of the moth shot that you've seen, that moths are flying, and then all of a sudden you see these 5-6 different moths, and you think that, like, well, it's the same moth, it's just 1 second exposure, 4 second exposure, or whatever it was, and then all in that 4 seconds the flash maybe fired 10 times or something, right? So that's another effect that can be done, which is sort of on the same principle.
That's a really good way of explaining how flash actually exposes the image. So as you're saying, the shutter is open for a second, and then the flash is illuminating the same moth 4 or 5 times, because it's gone off 4 or 5 times during the exposure, and the moth's in different parts of the frame, so it actually looks like there are 4 or 5 moths. I think that's a really good way of explaining it.
They must teach that in kindergarten in Hungary. I mean, you see so many Hungarian photographers that make incredible usage of that technique, to the point of perfection almost, some of the stuff we see, especially in wild art.
There were a couple of them in wild art. They were like really, really cool. So that's another great way of using flash, and that you can do in terms of freezing motion.
Question for you, Khurram, and this is really controversial. It used to be a standard, and now people don't care as much, and I'd love to get your input on this.
So in my profession, right, every day you'll have 4 drug reps come in and hand me pieces. Oh, we have this drug, it does this. We have this drug, it does this. We have this drug, it does this. It's like, okay. And the way you look at it is you say, okay, you are saying that this is an instrument or this is a medication, and it is effective. All right, based on, all right, this is your research. So you take a look at that and you go for research. So, and then decide really what's going on. So the whole concept that people think is that, does flash really harm? So one thing that everybody sort of okay with is that you use flash excessively or too much on animals that primarily see in the dark, it could potentially be harmful, at least transiently, right? So that's the general consensus. So if you're flashing an owl at 2 a.m. in the morning and you're flashing it away, and that's just not cool. So you're probably doing some sort of harm. Now, there have been studies done, actually, believe it or not. One of the best studies was actually done, on the West Indian anole, which is a form of lizard. And the thing was that they found that the lizard was actually more, it would have more of a reaction to the shutter sound than to the flash itself. So that was, and they deemed that, flash, nobody, when used responsibly in short duration, short burst, doesn't cause harm. There's another
It's often
study.
diffused as well, right? It's going through a diffuser for the most part, in most cases, correct? Yeah.
Exactly. There was another study done on Seymour which did the same thing. They found no significant difference in behavior of the bird. General rule of thumb is, in my experience, I have used flash and I've seen that sometimes a bird will flinch. If that's the case, and if I do it again and it flinches, I'll stop. Okay, I'm not going to do it. So I can see if I use a flash and I see the animal doesn't care, then I will use it. I'm not one of those who's going to press on the shutter and go to town. Flash generally after 1 or 2 or 3 tops, the cells need to recycle. So you're not going to be just bursting anyhow. The camera's not going to, you're going to have frames which are not flash. So general consensus is studies have not shown any harm. Obviously, it's a hard subject to study. Difficult to have a control and a non-controlled environment to do this. However, if most of the consensus is it doesn't cause harm, use it responsibly. If you see an animal flinch, stop. Don't do it. If the animal doesn't, then you go from there and then take your image. You don't have to start flashing the bird for the next 5 hours, right? You can't. You shouldn't do that. But you shouldn't be photographing a bird for 5 hours straight anyhow. But you're at that point you're altering behavior based on other things. But the general consensus is that it's okay to use, observe an animal. If an animal has a problem, walk away. You approach an animal, and if the animal's afraid and it flies away, you shouldn't be chasing that bird from from
That
perch to
field
perch.
craft if you're doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I think this does come down to that sort of fieldcraft thing and just being sensible about it. I mean, you know yourself that if somebody is using a flash and taking a picture of you in reasonably bright conditions, you are not going to notice that flash.
No.
Whereas if you are in a dark room and you look directly at a flash and somebody takes a picture with that does affect you. So there's,
Exactly.
The animals are going to have the same reaction or similar reactions in the same sort of circumstances. So if you are photographing a bird in daylight and you're using a very sort of low powered flash as fill-in, that's going to have far less effect on that bird than if you're photographing an owl at night, for example. But what I would say about owl photography in particular, because I guess this is probably one of those sort of controversial areas where people think that it's at night, it's dark, and then all of a sudden it's got this burst of light, thinking it's this huge, great big boof of light hits it like a freight train. That's not the case. I mean, you're looking at very, very low powered flash bursts there that really the animal's not going to be that affected by, if at all. So that is one thing to say, because I know people that do this and run workshops that photograph owls with flash, and they do it very, very responsibly. So I think you've just got to use common sense.
Exactly.
If you're going to photograph an owl with a 1-to-1 burst of flash that we're talking about manually, that's at short distance. Well, that's not on. If you're using a very low powered flash, and it's not in its face directly, you just got to be sensible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The whole purpose, of flash is to make your stuff. It's very, when you do night photography and you're using owls, it's very, very tough to make an owl. I'll use owlin as an example. In the pitch black darkness to look good. I've done that in Costa Rica. We were on a night walk. There was an owl, and we did use flash. The owl was not perturbed. He didn't care. But the images, no matter how I did, just didn't have that feel to it. That like, okay. So mostly, when you make it look natural, it looks good. When you make it look unnatural, it doesn't look good. So, when you have an animal in the pitch darkness and you're using light, it's going to look artificial. So it's almost near impossible to make an owl look natural when you're photographing it in the middle of the night. So it's a tough task to begin with. But I think the best advice in this is be responsible, observe your animal. If it's okay, do your thing, and don't push your luck too much. If you feel the animal's perturbed, let it be. Don't, the image isn't worth it at that point.
I think the artificiality of it too comes out, especially when the flash is coming directly at the animal. I mean,
Absolutely.
ideally, from my standpoint, if you can get it, when you use flash, if you use it at an angle, that's where you bring out shadows. You introduce side light. You introduce the drama. If light is coming straight at the animal, it's going to be flat. It's going to look artificial, and it's going to look boring, right? So, I guess always think about that too. The direction of the flash and what kind of angle you want to bring it. Sometimes flash is used. I think it's an incredible look when you place especially for remote camera trapping, when you have the flash behind the animal and you just create your own artificial.
I was just about to say exactly the same thing. Yeah,
it looks amazing.
Yeah, I was just about, because I've done this with birds, as we were talking about earlier when we were talking about flash duration and image sharpness, and that's something that I really enjoy playing around with is to shove a flash behind something, and I've done this with people as well. When I photograph people, sometimes to actually put a flash behind somebody is actually so effective, because as you were saying, Josh, you get this rim of light around them. It's almost like a halo effect, but it illuminates the sort of the hair on their head, and it just creates that separation from the background and lifts an image from the ordinary to the more extraordinary.
Yeah,
it
sure.
really does. So play around with those sorts of things. And how do you? I mean, personally, what I prefer to do is to have remote flashes which I control from a little box which I put on the hot shoe of the camera. Is that how you guys do it, or do you use brackets more commonly?
We've done both, actually. More recently we've done sort of put the flash on its own stand to the side and not really bothered with the bracket stuff. Especially I think this spring we did that. We did use flash, and we had it to the side on a different, and then basically we had it attached to us via a transmitter, and that's how we've used direction. I think one of the things that comes to mind was the white-throated sparrow thing, and that was done. The flash was done from the left side or the right side. I don't know, from one of the
we had a light stand, I think, for that, Khurram.
Yeah. Use that. So mostly we've done that. It's when you're walking around a lot and everything, and that's sort of easy to have it on a bracket. We've done that as well, but bracket is good because if you're shooting small birds right there, but it doesn't create the same drama as directional light would. In bracket is helpful because it does create, because it just creates an angle. You'll get a little bit of shadow, so there's a gradient to it, and that looks very well. But the other stuff is that if you don't, then you're gonna, if you go from the side or left or right or back, it just creates that extra dimension to an image, and that's like, oh, okay, this is different. This is not something you normally see.
Yeah. So and how many flashes do you tend to use?
You can use
just the one, or do you sometimes use a multi?
So it depends on what you're trying to create, right? You can use one, you can use two, you can use three, you can use four, right? Whatever you want to do, you can do. So going back to that, image of the skunk in the backyard, that was 3 flashes, right? And I've generally, when I'll do camera trapping, I'll do 2. You want to have the main light, and then you want to have the fill-in light, because you obviously can't hold a reflector. And if you want to expose, your background, you can have a background for the third light, third flash for the background. Mostly for camera trapping 2. Birds, generally we go with 1. You can do 2 if you want. There's nothing stopping you, but ideally what I would recommend is have whatever side you pick, one side should have double the power compared to the other side. Again, create shadows, and shadow, it contrast, and contrast catches the eye.
Do you know, you sort of describing how you set up those flashes with that sort of 2-to-1 type ratio, power ratio, takes me back to how I learnt about flash and the use of it. And it wasn't through wildlife photography, it was through portrait photography books. And I think that's a really good place for people to start, actually, because portrait photographers really understand that relationship so well. And that sort of 2-to-1, ratio that you were talking about is used a lot in portrait photography. That's really where it comes from. So you have one flash on one side, half the power of another flash. So that sort of flash on the left, if you like, might be your main light, and then you have this sort of half-powered fill-in flash on the other side, and then that creates, at least some contrast and some shadow areas to give the image some depth, which is what you need.
Yeah.
And I think, that's what I would recommend people do if you want to understand those sorts of relationships and how that sort of that light work. Sorry, I've got a shield bug walking up the side of my screen because when we're recording this, it's actually
flash out, Rob. Get your macro.
Exactly. Now, when we record this, it's quite late at night for me, so it's dark, and I've got the windows open because it's warm, and these insects are coming in, attracted to the light. And I've got the shield bug wandering across the top of my screen. It's pretty cool. Anyway,
awesome.
So what was it? I was talking. Yeah, so people go and check out some portrait photography and how they use the flashlights, and it gives you a really, really good understanding of how they use and set up their lights. And I think that we can use this, particularly when we're talking about portrait type work with birds and animals as well. So yeah, it's really good.
Light always better than light straight on. No question. What angle, where, experiment. One of the going back to some of the things you said earlier, the best thing if people who want to get into it is get a figure. I'm not sure what kind of a figure or toy or whatever you want to do, right? My son has a lot of figures, so they're easily accessible for me. Play around, see the angle, experiment between different shutter speed, different flash speeds, right? Experiment with the angle of the light, right, left, top, bottom, whatever you want to do. Play around with your aperture usually doesn't have that much of an effect. Play around with the shutter speed and see what that does. Do the curtain sinks and play and practice and see what TTL does and what manual does. And, literally 4 or 5 sessions, it's not that hard. It's really not that hard.
I think it's fair to say too, we were just talking about multi-flash versus maybe using one flash in the field, or the 2-to-1 ratio. I think it's fair to say most photographers use multiple flashes on remote setups where they're camera trapping. Most what I've seen, if it's a macro or bird, it's one flash and then sometimes a reflector. So you have a reflector on what this is more so for macro, frogs, insects, and so forth. You'll have a flash from one side, a reflector on the other. You can do that for snakes. But most people typically shoot with one flash, unless it's maybe a hummingbird setup or remote trigger, remote camera setups where you're leaving a whole setup in the field. Maybe you want to illuminate the animal on both sides, but you want to show some of the environment because it's going to be dark. So maybe one flash hits the trees in the background and so forth. But that's typically how I see it.
No,
yeah, there was another point I wanted to make actually, because when people start thinking about these sort of, start talking about multiple flash setups, and we all know how expensive some of those speed lights are for the main brands. So Canon or Nikon or whatever. If you want to buy their branded speed lights, I mean, I don't know what they are now in dollar terms, but I guess you're looking at maybe £400, so maybe 500 US, something like that
for the higher end ones, right?
Yeah, for the higher end ones. And when you start talking about that sort of money, it gets quite eye-watering if you think, well, I'm going to need, these guys are saying, well, sometimes use 3 or 4. Well, I don't want to spend all that money on those. My advice is you don't need that. There are some really good third-party flashes which will do probably 90% of what a brand dedicated speed light will give you, and most of that extra 10% you'll never need anyway, for like a fraction of the cost. I mean, I picked up, I don't know, set of 3, I think, flashes which I can use the remote controller for probably £200 the lot.
Mm.
Something like that. So
Godox is pretty good. I've used them.
yeah,
That's a good third party. I know.
yeah. I think I can't
Godox,
remember what these are. But
a couple of other ones like the Chinese ones, Yongnuo and stuff
Yongnuo,
like.
that's what I've got. Yeah.
You can use $50 in, was the manual one, and that's some of those are the ones, I've used in hummingbirds, and Godox I'll use, but I'd used Godox more when I was with Sony. But now that I'm back with Nikon, I use the Nikon ones. I had them lying around from 10, 12, when I first started, and they work just fine. But Godox is really good. Yongnuo is really good. I think Yongnuo also has one that is TTL too, as well. And then generally the manual ones that you get are pretty good.
Yeah, there's some other brands as well. I think will do TTL quite well, and even that sort of high speed sync stuff as well. They'll they're
one
compatible.
trick that's important for everyone to know if you're doing remote camera setups. You need to have a specific type of flash, one that can go into a sleep mode and immediately react. I know, like the Nikon, what is it? SB? Khurram, you would know.
SB something.
So it has an SB28, but they don't
SB28.
make them any. Yeah, so they have an inbuilt capacitor which holds its charge, so it doesn't need to be woken, and it can fire right away. So when you have an animal that triggers a camera trap, it fires right away. So because of that, it's almost near impossible to find SB28s because they stopped making them a long time ago. However, a lot of other companies are now making one in the camp caption itself. The company has a flash that I actually use, and they've built a flash, and it's a British company, and those flash have inbuilt capacitors. So I fried my SB28s.
And I still have two, but they're on the way out. But yeah, if you don't do that, everything's a butt shot. That cougar that comes into the frame, you're looking at its butt on the way back.
But
by the time your flash has woken up, it's a good point, actually.
Yeah. So
it's a good point.
Keep in mind.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And the other thing, which I don't think we mentioned is when we're using this, use a diffuser, right? Yeah. So it is, there's no such thing. I mean, you can use a flash without a diffuser, but it's just harsh. So, light, when there's natural light, it's going to be harsh. When you diffuse the light, it becomes softer, and the softer depicts the color much more beautifully. I mean, Josh was showing me some image the other day of a bumblebee, and it's nicely diffused, and the whole thing is just beautiful.
It wraps around the animal better too when your light is diffused.
I think a really good way of explaining it is look at a subject in harsh sunlight, and then look at something that's that's lit with, say, high cloud on a bright day, and look at how the light is different, and you're doing exactly the same thing, because what you're doing by introducing a diffuser is breaking up those light particles, and, as you're saying, Josh, spreading them around more evenly around your subject.
Making the shadows less harsh. So it looks
and the thing is, actually you can start playing around with the level of diffusion as well if you want to get really nerdy about it and experimental, because there are diffusers and there are diffusers. I mean, all sorts of things. I mean, I love those little mini soft boxes you can get over it and you just shove over the front. I love those. I mean, people produce a really nice light.
And trust me, we've taken those whole umbrellas and
you need two people or a very strong arm to get that thing in position.
Shoot, and then it's his turn. It's my turn to shoot it, and then he has to hold that thing. And I'm like, just they produce light. That's great, but I'm almost over them.
Yeah. What's the little one? The Luma
Lume Cube? No,
not Lume Cube, but it's like a 14x14, or it's a smaller diffuser. I forgot the name. Well, in any event, I think if you have a diffuser that works, right, Khurram, then it's not too big. Yeah.
Get it.
Well, I know a lot of the macro photographers, they make their own, don't they?
Yeah.
They make their own diffusers.
And they're typically the best users of flash. I mean, most macro photography incorporates flash, and I find that they seem, at least the macro photographers, the ones that specialize in it, they seem to be really the experts when it comes to flash.
Yeah, and they can spend a fortune on their flash setups. I mean, you got those little, I like, like the ring that sits around your lens, and then you have the sort of 2 or 3 little flash units that sit on that itself, the little macro flashes. They are just so expensive. I think they're hundreds of pounds each, those things.
Well,
so you can spend a fortune on those.
Young Neo makes a good one, which is like, a knockoff version of one of those. So, I think I have it here in the back. I've had it for like 7-8 years. I've used it like never. So
and then there are the ring flashes, which you really can get quite cheaply as well. I mean, 30-40 pounds, maybe sort of 40-50 US, something like that. You can get the ring flash, which again a lot of portrait photographers, a lot of fashion photographers use, because it creates that an interesting lighting effect. But basically what that does, it surrounds the outside of your lens basically, and creates this sort of uniform light, uniform flash all the way around the lens to try and create a sort of uniform light on the subject itself. I find those a little uninspiring. I think again the lighting can be quite flat. It's very good if you're documenting things. It's like forensic photographers use those ring flashes quite a lot, don't they, in sort of crime scenes and this, that, and the other. If that's your style of photography and you're looking to document things, like you're looking, I don't know, to take pictures of moths, for example, for a photo guide, that would be perfect. Nice diffuse light, nice and even. But for artistic photographer, and the way I like to try and approach things, the ring flash really sort of stays in the photography cupboard a lot most of the time. It's not something I really want to be.
Maybe people, I see those with people who photograph maybe insects, inverts really up close, where and they want to just get a light that surrounds versus an off-camera flash they normally have.
If you're trying to create those cutouts, so an insect on a white background, for example, perfect for that sort of thing. But
I have a random question for you both now that I'm thinking about it. Catch light, what do you think about that? That was a standard years ago, and when you shoot a bird or anything with a flash, you always get a catch light, and that used to be a thing. You want a catch light in the eye. I feel like now, tell me what you both think. I feel like photographers don't care about catch light as much. It's not a thing, like it was years ago. It was like a standard. I don't know. What do you all think of that?
Well, part of the problem, I think, is, we have started seeing photography on Instagram. So, you gotta, how do you even see a catch light, right?
Good point.
So that's one issue. I think that's part of the problem. People are we live in a world, okay, so something, unless it's super artificially saturated or in your face, cropped in, like the attention grabbing images. So flashlight is sort of hard to see on this. People have catch lights because, the sun, if you're out in the sun, you're going to have a shadow of the sun. So the whole purpose of that, if you have light, if you're shooting somebody indoors with an artificial light, you're going to have a catch light. So that's, again, goes back to the point, you want to make it natural. So if you show me an image, and when, you have an image of, for example, of a red fox, and you capture it with, Chemtraption or some sort of motion trigger, and then you have 3 catch lights. I mean, that's fake, right? So nobody really has a catch light, even though we know that it was done using a flash. Doesn't matter if it was 3 flashes versus 1 flash. The human mind wants it to be as close to normal as you want it to be. So I would still prefer it to be, natural, like 1 catch light, so to speak. Does it really? So if you have a catch light and things, you don't have a red eye, I think you've done a good job. The whole point is to make the flash be artistic, do something that you normally don't see, or make it, enhance the details, make it look natural. And then if you have a catch light, you have a catch light.
So that's exactly what I was going to say, actually, myself, that if the image comes out and it looks natural, then that's the sort of look that I'm looking for. I mean, if you've got those sort of 2 or 3 catch lights, almost like looking up in the sky and seeing 2 moons, it just looks a bit weird,
Welcome to Endor, Mr. Fox.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? I think yes, it has to look natural, but I think that a catch light always elevates, because eyes can get a bit lost, I think, and if you've got that extra sort of bit, that bright bit of light, it can draw attention to the eye area, and I think that's what the catch light has historically done, and I think it's still an important element. But I
It
think
draws.
it's to Khurram's point, if it's looking unnatural, then it takes that element away rather than adding to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. On a cloudy day, I like to have a little starry catch light in the eye if I'm using flash. If you don't use flash, you get, the lower half of the eye is richer, and the upper half is just kind of more of cloudy, if that makes sense, right? It's half and half. That look is okay. It's just personal preference, but it's evolved over the years. A lot of the old school photographers I talk to, they like that little starry catch light, in every eye. I don't know if that was a standard back then, but it seems to be evolving, now.
Unfortunately, I mean, all the photography has changed, right? So we live in the Instagram era, or social media era, whatever you want to call it. But, which I think has changed photography and how people, want to portray their art. And, you have grown ass men doing TikTok reels. I mean, that's
not me.
Yeah,
I am a photographer
Yet.
and I took this image. Nah,
Yeah.
nah, nah, nah. I mean, yeah.
that's why you have my respect still, Rob. So, but,
Thanks.
a reel shows up. I don't know about that, but, but it's
I do my best to avoid them, but yeah.
Same here. So
it's the algorithm, the algorithm needs the real.
Yeah.
So it's just, you keep it natural, as much as you keep it natural. I think it's pleasing. It's a tool. It's a tool that enhances your image if done right. It's a tool that should not be overused. It's a tool that you shouldn't be scared of. It can create a beautiful artistic element. You can use it to freeze motion. You can use it to expand your dynamic range. So there's so many uses of flash, right? So many uses. I mean, believe it or not, there are people who actually use it for landscape, which was mind-boggling to me when I first saw that. But they'll expose for the background, and then they'll, expose the foreground with a little bit of flash as they take the exposure, and so it's got so many uses. Play with it, use a model, experiment with manual, experiment with TTL, experiment with placing the flash all different places, experiment with exposure. If an animal seems perturbed, don't use it. I think it's just a great asset.
And I think that's a really good summary of all the points that we've talked about, and probably a really good place to leave it and wrap things up. So yeah, no, I mean, there's so much we could go on and talk about. I mean, as
Absolutely.
with all of these sort of podcasts, as you go on and have these conversations, it sparks these ideas and these things, these little sort of rabbit holes that you want to keep diving down and exploring. And it's been one of those conversations. So there is so much more we could talk about, but do people want to listen for 2 or 3 hours? Probably, probably good to keep it to sort of an hour or thereabouts, which is well, we're over that, but I don't suppose people will mind. But no, it's been a fascinating conversation again. Thank you so much for coming on, Khurram, and having the chat with us about it. Khurram, if people don't know how they can get hold of you, I mean, you should do by now, and most people I think listening to this will probably be following you on Instagram. But why don't you sing out your Instagram handle for everybody so they can go and check you out?
First name _ Khan, last name _ photos. So Khurram _ Khan _ photos. That's Instagram. And KhurramKhanPhotos.com is my website, which I will probably, update twice a year. But mostly Instagram on a day-to-day basis.
Great stuff. Well, I'll put those links anyway in the show notes,
Absolutely.
for everybody, so they can click on those links directly. But no, it's been great having you on, and been a really good discussion. So thanks for your time. I know you're a very busy man.
Well, no, never photography. So
yeah, absolutely. But I know you're busy with your family and busy with work and everything. So it's I really do appreciate your time for coming on and having the chat. It's been great, and I said great to chat to you as well, Josh, as always.
Yeah, good conversation.
So I'm not sure what we're going to do next in terms of a podcast. I know we've been trying to get Rebecca on to talk about Shetland. And our experiences there, and hopefully, that we'll be able to organise that soon, because that will be a good discussion. Having sort of been there for the first time myself earlier, at the beginning of June. I know you guys went a couple of weeks after me, so and haven't even gone through your pictures yet.
You've been posting some stuff. You're way ahead of us, Rob.
I have, but I haven't been posting the best stuff.
You're saving it.
I'm saving it. I'm saving it.
I posted one image, so I got to work on that.
Yeah, no, I'm interested to see some of your stuff. So if you don't want to share it on social media, just email me a few little samples.
Yeah,
we'll do.
But
interested to see what you come up with.
You haven't processed anything other than that one image.
Yeah, no, I'm interested to see what you guys took, because I know that Rebecca said to me that you guys are hardcore. You did what, 2 weeks? 2 weeks on Shetland, and you didn't sleep very much.
Yeah, that's what the afternoon's for.
Absolutely. You make the best of the best light.
Yeah,
I completely agree. Anyway, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting away to you, about a fascinating subject. So I hope everybody listening has enjoyed that and have got something out of it. If you have, then do make sure that you give us a like. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the show, about the discussion. Tell us what you'd like to hear more about, to have us talk about. Make some suggestions in the comments. That's always great. And of course, give us a rating as well, because that really helps the algorithm find us and put us out to broadcast us to more people, which is the whole point of this, of course. So if you've got something out of it, then hopefully there are other people out there that can get something out of it as well. So by giving us comments and ratings and all that nice stuff, then it really helps the podcast out. It would be much appreciated. Anyway, guys, thanks once again. Been great to chat. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you all again in the next one.
Have a good night, everybody.
Take care. Thanks.
You have been listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast. If you have enjoyed the content, then please help us to spread the word by sharing a link on your social media platforms, giving us a like, and leaving us a comment. See you all again next time.